The Orlando Magic are building something special. After drafting Paolo Banchero with the #1 overall selection in this year's draft, alongside with a couple other moves the Magic have been making as of late, it finally seems like Orlando is turning a corner. But quickly, before we get the video started, for those of you who may not know, I'm Juicy Sports, I make opinionative NBA content, and if you guys enjoy videos similar to this, hit that subscribe button, that like button, and that post notification bell. I also want to quickly mention that I recently started up an MMA channel, and if you guys are interested in that, the link will be in the description. But anyways, let's get into it. The Orlando Magic were one of those teams that were just consistently bad for a very long time now. And no matter how many times they got high overall draft picks, it just seemed like it never mattered. And the Magic were just never able to identify high-level prospects. And even if they were to get lucky enough to identify a really good player high in that year's draft, it was assumed by many that that player would just eventually get traded from the Magic, or that player would just eventually leave in free agency. The Magic were certainly a very dysfunctional franchise for a decent amount of time, and overall it was just pretty clear that not many players would want to go to the Magic in free agency. Now obviously the Magic still have a long way to go, as they are still somewhat early into the rebuild process, but I would definitely make the argument that the Magic are starting to make much better moves as an organization, and I would certainly say that the Magic are making much better decisions now than they were in the past. And one great example of this is when the Magic traded for Markelle Fultz when his value was at an all-time low in Philadelphia, and whenever you're able to trade for a former #1 overall selection by only giving up 2 second-round picks and a couple players that are bench players, maybe starters at best, is always a gamble worth taking. And at the time, I thought the Magic made a really good decision in trading for Markelle, and at this point, it certainly has paid dividends for Orlando, as Markelle has been playing very high-level basketball in Orlando so far, and although he still hasn't necessarily lived up to those expectations of being the #1 overall selection, I would still say that he's a very valuable piece to what they do in Orlando and will be for some time. I also really like what the Magic were able to do in the Nikola Vucevic trade a few seasons back, where it was pretty clear that the Magic were headed in the direction of a youth movement, and they were trying to acquire as many young players as they possibly could to add to their young core, while also acquiring as many draft picks as they possibly could, so it became a pretty easy decision for them to trade away their best player in Vucevic, where in return they got 2 first-round picks alongside with Wendell Carter Jr. and Otto Porter, and one of those first-round picks turned into Franz Wagner, which in my opinion he's a very intriguing young prospect that I do like, so I definitely really like what the Magic did in that deal as well. And overall, the point that I'm trying to make is the Magic are finally starting to make good deals in the trade market, as well as make some good selections in the draft. But now let's get into the point of the video, which is why I think the Magic are building something special. So although I did say I do think the Magic are somewhat early on into their rebuild process, they have although established a pretty nice base of young players at this point. And they have guys like Paolo, who they just drafted, Jalen Suggs, Franz Wagner, Markelle Fultz, Jonathan Isaac even, Cole Anthony. They just have a bunch of different young players that I do like on their roster. And a few of those guys that I did mention, I do truly think they're going to become very good players in the future, specifically Paolo. But whenever you're rebuilding a new team, there's a few different steps that you need to go through. The first step is identifying that franchise guy, which I think the Magic did identify in Paolo, although it is extremely early and he still hasn't played a single NBA game yet. But that's just my hunch that he could potentially be that franchise guy for the Magic. But assuming that Paolo is that franchise guy for Orlando, but the next step would be finding and identifying some other nice young players to put around that franchise guy, while at the same time identifying some veterans that you could sprinkle into your roster that would be pretty decent players on the court, but also have a very nice presence off the court for your young guys. Because although it may sound nice to have a full team of young players, it is extremely important to sprinkle in a couple of veterans to your roster, because the young guys just don't know certain things in terms of on the court as well as off the court, so having that veteran presence to teach the younger guys on that roster about specific things in terms of work ethic, specific things on the court, and just about NBA life in general, it's just going to have huge beneficial effects on your younger guys. So it's definitely extremely extremely important, and it's something that a lot of people do talk about. And when you look at the Magic roster, they do have a couple of guys that would fit that narrative. But the next step after that would be to continue building through their draft while also improving the young players you already have on your roster, and I think that's basically where the Magic are at this point. But one of the biggest reasons why I think the Magic are building something special is due to the drafting of Paolo in this year's draft. But now let's take Paolo's game point by point to really describe why I think he's going to be such a good player in the NBA going forward. So starting with his 3-point jump shot, Paolo only shot around 33% from deep, which obviously isn't all that impressive, but when you consider that his jump shot form is actually very nice, there is no reason to believe he wouldn't be able to improve that with a couple years of NBA experience, while also including a ton of practice with that as well. Because there are a bunch of examples of other players that in college weren't necessarily all that consistent of 3-point shooters, but they did have a really nice jump shot form, and once they got drafted into the NBA, and once they got a few years of experience under their belt, they did turn into a much better 3-point shooter and a much better shooter as a whole. But the great thing about Paolo is he's very versatile, and he does have a pretty nice mid-range game, as he has a really nice pull-up mid-range jump shot as well as a nice catch and shoot, even has a pretty nice post turnaround fadeaway, which is something that I do mention in a lot of my videos as something that's very important to take your game to the next level, or at the very least take your scoring ability to the next level. But Paolo also has a really nice ability to drive all the way to the basket, and he does a nice job at finishing with either hand, either his left or right, after blowing by his initial defender, while at the same time having the ability to posturize players at times as well. And overall, I would say in terms of his scoring ability, he's just very versatile at all 3 levels of the game. But the great thing about Paolo is he also has a pretty nice passing and playmaking ability as well, at that 6'10 size, which is definitely something that would be very valuable at the NBA level. Of course, I wouldn't consider Paolo as a phenomenal passer and playmaker, but at the same time, he does have a certain level of understanding of the NBA game, or at the very least of the college game that we have seen so far, where he really knows where all his teammates are out there and really has a nice ability to find the open guy for a wide open catch and shoot 3-point jump shot, or find the guy cutting back door for a wide open dunk or layup. And definitely having a player that's a really good scorer but also has a pretty decent ability to pass and playmake is something that's very important at the NBA level. Now Paolo is also a pretty good defender as well, which just adds to the allure of him, but one thing that I will say is at times he's somewhat inconsistent defensively, in the sense that he's not always fully motivated on that side of the court, which is something that he needs to work on at the NBA level. But in terms of his raw defensive skills, he definitely has them. And overall, even though I am putting a lot of stock into Paolo turning into a really good player in the future for the Magic, I would say either way, no matter what happens with him specifically, I still do think the Magic have a pretty nice future ahead of them due to a lot of the other young players that I did mention in this video, but mostly due to the fact that the Magic's front office is finally starting to make the right decisions, or at the very least it seems like they are. Because no matter what happens with the current players the Magic have on their roster, if the Magic just continue to draft effectively and build through the draft, they'll eventually turn into a much better team as the years do progress. So overall, there certainly are a ton of different things to be excited about as a Magic fan. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think the Magic have a bright future ahead of them, or do you not think so? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy it, check one of these 2 videos popping up now, and until the next time, peace out guys.